Fanatics, welcome to Diamond Painting Fanatics. I am Cindy and today is Thursday, which means it's Thriller Thursday. So I upload a new crime story. Now this one was recommended to me by a subscriber, and as I delved into it, it was a lot more complex than I first gave it credit for. Everyone will have heard of this, whether you've looked into it in more detail, which I did purely on a suggestion. So I'm so thankful to Amanda because I enjoyed this. And I was talking to Carl, he's 17, about Jack the Ripper, and not in any real detail. And then my Reese, who is just turned 12, he said to me, I know about Jack the Ripper and he killed 5 women. And I'm like, what do you know about Jack the Ripper? And apparently he's doing him at school. And I said, well, I do on my channel, I do a crime story every Thursday, and Jack the Ripper is my next one. And he said, but I want to do it. So because it's so complex and there's details in there which I'm sure he doesn't know, so I am going to talk about this case with you guys openly and honestly, and giving my opinions along the way. And I have quite a few and suspicions and probably new leads. And then what I'm going to do at the end of the video is bring Reese on, and he's going to tell you his version of Jack the Ripper and what Jack the Ripper has done. So yeah, I would like to ask you a question while we're face to face. I like to take up a little bit more of your time. If you don't diamond paint, which is fine, you can cross stitch, you can paint, you can do housework, you can do anything. But I'm curious, what do you do when you're listening to my true crimes? Do you diamond paint, craft? Yeah, leave it in the comments, let me know. I love interacting with you all. I do read all my comments and I try to reply to all of them, so that would be awesome. While I'm here also, I have noticed a little spike in subscribers, and I wanted to say I see you, and to all of my subscribers, new and old, I love you all, and it means so much that I'm seeing the numbers going up. I am so very thankful that you have taken the time to subscribe to my channel, and I hope you enjoy my content. Thursdays are a little bit morbid. I do weekend chats, as they are known. So I work on my project, hopefully while you're working on yours, and chat about true crime. Last week I did Fred West. That was difficult. I did Fred West, or Fred and Rose West, because they're equally as evil as each other. And I won't lie, that affected me on a personal level for the rest of the week. a lot of that was close to the bone with what I have gone through. Obviously I'm here to tell the story, or my story at least. Yeah, but moving on, I enjoyed this one, and it's so interesting, like really interesting. So if you are a fan of true crime stories, cases, because they actually happened, if you enjoy diamond painting, I have other content on my channel. Mailman Mondays is all my unboxings. Tutorial Tuesdays, all my tutorial, all my experiments, everything in there. Whip and Chat Wednesdays, I must start doing that a bit more, but it's just me, what I'm doing, things. Yeah, it's chaos. The world is in chaos. Then we have Thriller Thursdays and Family Fanatic Fridays. If I can get both kids to sit, we chat and we talk, and wow, yeah. So that can be interesting. Then I have Slash the Stash Saturdays, where I do post reviews on products that, or projects I should say, that I have worked on, my honest opinions on those. I am open and honest in all of my videos. Maybe too much so, but it's my channel. What are you going to do? So I would love to have you on board to join Diamond Painting Fanatics and reach out to me, chat to me. I love it. But yeah, let's get on with this true crime episode. It's fascinating on a few levels and eye-opening. Yeah, so we're going all the way back to 1888. So I'm going to turn you around so you can watch my diamond painting. I am working on my Diamond Art Club festive fireplace, and I am on the bottom 2 sections, so I am getting there. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. Thank you for allowing me to take up some of your time, and I shall see you very soon, guys. Lots of love, lots of hugs, and lots of sparkles to you all. Bye-bye. So, Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer. Means he killed more than 3 people. Active in the largely impoverished area in and around Whitechapel in London in 1888. The killer was called the Whitechapel Murderer and Leather Apron. Never heard him called Leather Apron, but we find out why later. The attacks associated to Jack the Ripper typically involved female prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of East End London, whose throats were cut prior to abdominal mutilations. The removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims led to proposals that their killer had some kind of surgical knowledge. Rumours that the murders were connected intensified in September and October of 1888. Numerous letters were received by the media, which we will go into later, and one of them signed the name Jack the Ripper. And this was widely believed to be a hoax. Yet that's the name he was given. It obviously stuck. But I was thinking about this because, I've kind of glanced through the article and I thought maybe Jack the Slasher that's a bit harsh, I suppose. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so I'm going to just delve into the background. So, in the mid-19th century, Britain experienced an influx of Irish immigrants who swelled the populations of the major cities, including the East End of London. From 1882, Jewish refugees fleeing violent riots in Russia and other European places emigrated to the same area. The parish of Whitechapel in London's East End became increasingly overcrowded, with the population increasing to approximately 80,000 by 1888. Work and housing conditions worsened, and a significant economic underclass then began to develop. 55% of children born in the East End died before they were 5. That's over half of the children that were born in that time. Robbery, violence, alcohol dependency were all very common, and the severe poverty drove many women to prostitution on a daily basis. In October 1888, London's Metropolitan Police Service estimated that there were 62 brothels and 1,200 women working as prostitutes in Whitechapel. Approximately 8,500 people residing in the 233 common lodging houses within Whitechapel every night. I don't know how you say old money, but I'm just going to say it as it's read. Maybe someone can correct me. With the nightly price of a single bed being 4D, and the cost of sleeping upon a lean-to, a rope stretched across bedrooms. So what I think they mean is they separated rooms so that you could get 2 beds instead of 1 bed, and so on. For 2D for adults or children. The economic problems in Whitechapel were also accompanied by a steady rise in social tensions. So between 1886 and 1889, frequent demonstrations led to police interventions and a lot of public unrest, such as Bloody Sunday in 1887, anti-Semitism, crime, racism, social disturbance, and severe deprivation influenced public perceptions that Whitechapel was a notorious den of immorality. Such perceptions were strengthened in the autumn of 1888 when a series of vicious and grotesque murders attributed to Jack the Ripper received unprecedented coverage in the media. So, the murders. The large number of attacks against women in the East End during this time adds uncertainty to how many victims were murdered by the same individual. 11 separate murders stretching from the 3rd of April 1888 to February 1891 were included in a London Metropolitan Police Service investigation and were known collectively in the police docket as the Whitechapel murders. Now, opinions vary as to whether these murders should be linked to the same culprit, but 5 of the 11 murders were known as Jack the Ripper. He was the one that done them. And most experts point to deep slash wounds to the throat, followed by extensive abdominal and genital area mutilation, the removal of internal organs, and progressive facial mutilations as the distinctive feature of the Ripper's MO. Modus operandi. Yes, got it first time. The first two cases in the Whitechapel murder file, those of Emma Elizabeth Smith and Martha Tabram, are not included in the Jack the Ripper murders. So, Emma Elizabeth Smith was robbed and sexually assaulted in Osborne Street at approximately 1:30 a.m. on the 3rd of April 1888. She had been bludgeoned about the face and received a cut to her ear. A blunt object was also inserted into her lady parts, rupturing her peritoneum. Can't say that. She died the following day at London Hospital. Emma stated that she had been attacked by 2 or 3 men, one of whom she described as a teenager. This attack was linked to the later murders by the media, but most authors attribute her murder to a general East End gang violence unrelated to Jack the Ripper. Martha Tabram was murdered on a staircase landing in George Yard on the 7th of August 1888. She suffered 39 stab wounds to her throat, her lungs, her heart, her liver, her spleen, her stomach and abdomen, with additional knife wounds inflicted to her breasts and her lady parts. All but one of Martha's wounds had been inflicted with a blade such as a penknife, and with one possible exception, all the wounds had been inflicted by a right-handed individual, and she had not been raped. The savagery of this murder, the lack of an obvious motive, and the closeness of the location and dates to the later Jack the Ripper murders, led police to link this murder to those later committed by Jack the Ripper. However, this murder differs from the Jack the Ripper murders because although Martha had been repeatedly stabbed, she hadn't suffered any slash wounds to her throat or abdomen. Many experts do not connect Martha's murder with the later murders because of this difference in the wound pattern. Now, before I move on, I will be sharing my opinions. I can't help it. But as someone who is a true crime fanatic myself, there's a morbid curiosity, and it's like, how can someone do this to another human? That's what the interest is. So we know that let's just take a teenager. A teenager is still wet in the bed. That's a key sign of a serial killer. Along with harming animals. Then they might move on to arson. Then they move on to murder. And I don't understand how they can rule out that Martha wasn't part of the Jack the Ripper murders early on, because he may not have found his modus operandi, his MO. So that's my opinion, and I have a lot of them along the way. So the 5 Jack the Ripper victims. I just need to write this down because they use surnames and I don't like it. So we have Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly. They're the 5 that they have put on Jack the Ripper. The body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered about 3:40 a.m. on Friday the 31st of August in Box Row. This is now known as Durwood Street. Nichols had last been seen alive approximately 1 hour before the discovery of her body by a Mrs. Emily Holland, with whom she had previously shared a bed at a common lodging house in Thrall Street, walking in the direction of Whitechapel Road. Her throat was severed by 2 deep cuts, one of which completely severed all tissue down to the vertebrae. Her lady parts had been stabbed twice, and the lower part of her abdomen was partly ripped open by a deep, jagged wound, causing her bowels to protrude. Several other incisions inflicted to both sides of her abdomen had also been caused by the same knife. Each of these wounds had been inflicted in a downward thrusting manner. 1 week later, on Saturday the 8th of September 1888, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered at approximately 6 a.m. near the steps to the doorway of the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. As in the case of Mary Ann Nichols, the throat was severed by 2 deep cuts. Her abdomen had been cut entirely open, with a section of the flesh from her stomach being placed upon her left shoulder and another section of skin and flesh, plus her small intestines being removed and placed above her right shoulder. Annie's autopsy also revealed that her uterus and sections of her bladder and lady parts had been removed. So, again, this seems to be escalation. At the inquest into Annie's murder, Elizabeth Long described having seen Annie standing outside 29 Hanbury Street at about 5:30 a.m. in the company of a dark-haired man wearing a brown deerstalker hat and dark overcoat, and of a shabby appearance. According to this eyewitness, the man had asked Chapman the question, quote, "Will you?" To which Annie had replied, "Yes." Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both killed in the early morning hours of Sunday the 30th of September 1888. Stride's body was discovered at approximately 1 a.m. in Dupfield's Yard off Berners Street, which is now Henriques Street in Whitechapel. The cause of death was a single clear-cut incision measuring 6 inches across her neck, which had severed her left carotid, I can't say that, but it's an artery. Should we see where that artery is? You have one on each side of the neck. Okay, now we know. But yeah, that was cut, and her windpipe before terminating beneath her right jaw. The absence of any further mutilations to her body has led to uncertainty as to whether Elizabeth's murder was committed by the Ripper, or whether he was interrupted during the attack. Several witnesses later informed police they had seen Elizabeth in the company of a man in or close to Berners Street on the evening of the 29th of September, my mum's birthday, and in the early hours of the 30th of September, but each gave differing descriptions. Some had said her companion was fair, others dark. Some said he was shabbily dressed, others said well dressed. Catherine Eddowes' body was found in Meter Square in the City of London, 3/4 of an hour after the discovery of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat was severed and her abdomen ripped open by a long, deep and jagged wound before her intestines had been placed over her right shoulder. The left kidney and the major part of the uterus had been removed, and her face had been disfigured, with her nose severed, her cheek slashed, and cuts measuring 1/4 of an inch and a 1/2 inch respectively, vertically incised through each of her eyelids. A triangular incision, the apex of which pointed towards Catherine's eye, had also been carved upon each of her cheeks, and a section of her lobe of her right ear was later recovered from her clothing. The police surgeon who conducted the post-mortem upon Catherine's body stated his opinion: these mutilations would have taken at least 5 minutes to complete. A local cigarette salesman named Joseph had passed through the square with 2 friends shortly before the murder, and he described seeing a fair-haired man of shabby appearance with a woman who may have been Catherine. Joseph's companions were unable to confirm his description. The murders of Elizabeth and Catherine ultimately became known as the double event. A section of Catherine's bloodied apron was found at the entrance to a tenement in Goulston Street at 2:55 a.m. A chalk inscription upon the wall directly above this piece of apron read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." This graffiti became known as the Goulston Street graffiti. The message appeared to imply that a Jew or Jews in general were responsible for the series of murders, but it's unclear whether the graffiti was written by the murderer on dropping the section of apron or merely incidental and nothing to do with the case. Such graffiti were commonplace in Whitechapel, and Police Commissioner Charles Warren feared that the graffiti might spark an anti-Semitic riots, and ordered the writing be washed away before dawn. Let's get rid of that evidence. The extensively mutilated and disemboweled body of Mary Jane Kelly was discovered lying on the bed in the single room where she lived at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street at 10:45 a.m. on Friday the 9th of November 1888. Her face had been, quote, hacked beyond all recognition, with her throat severed down to the spine, the abdomen almost emptied of its organs. Her uterus, kidneys, and one breast had been placed beneath her head, and the other viscera from her body placed beside her foot, about the bed, and sections of her abdomen and thighs upon a bedside table. The heart was missing from the crime scene. Each of these Jack the Ripper murders was perpetrated at night on or close to a weekend, either at the end of a month or a week or so after. That doesn't really pin it down, does it? Yes, it's night time, but it's close to a weekend, at the end of the month, or maybe a week in from that. So that's the beginning of the month. Doesn't really pin it down. The mutilations became increasingly severe as the series of murders proceeded. This is what I said earlier. It's, the brutality rises. Except for that of Elizabeth Stride, whose attacker may have been interrupted. Mary Ann Nichols was not missing any organs. Annie Chapman's uterus and sections of her bladder and lady parts were taken. Catherine Eddowes had her uterus and left kidney removed and her face mutilated. And Kelly's body was extensively eviscerated with her face, quote, gashed in all directions, and the tissue of her neck being severed to the bone, although her heart was the sole body organ missing from this crime scene. So what is connecting them? Because you've got slashes. Well, they're saying that it's growing in brutality, I suppose. But, yeah, I remain sceptical. Historically, the belief of these 5 murders were committed by the same perpetrator is derived from contemporary documents which link them together to the exclusion of the others. In 1894, Sir Melville, Assistant Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police Service and the head of the Criminal Investigation Department, which is the CID, wrote a report that stated, quote, "The Whitechapel murderer had 5 victims and 5 victims only." The Jack the Ripper victims were linked together in a letter written by a police surgeon, Thomas Bond, to Robert Anderson, who was the head of the London CID. Okay, so Thomas Bond is the police surgeon, so like forensics guy, I guess. Okay, some researchers have proposed that some of the murders were undoubtedly the work of a single killer, but an unknown larger number of killers acting independently were responsible for the other crimes. Authors Stuart Evans and Donald Rumbelow argue that the Jack the Ripper 5 is a Ripper myth, and 3 of the cases, which was Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman and Catherine Eddowes, can definitely be linked to the same perpetrator, but that less certainty exists as to whether Elizabeth Stride and Mary Jane Kelly were also murdered by the same individual. I like this person. He's on my wavelength. Conversely, others suppose that the 6 murders between Martha Tabram and Mary Jane Kelly were the work of a single killer. Dr. Percy Clark, assistant to the examining pathologist George Bagster Phillips, linked only 3 of the murders and thought that the others were perpetrated by a, quote, weak-minded individual induced to emulate the crime, end quote. So, a copycat. There we go. So, Sir Melvin, who is the Assistant Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police Service, did not join the police force until the year after the murders, and his memorandum contained serious factual errors about possible suspects. So the plot thickens, guys. Okay, Mary Jane Kelly is generally considered to be the Ripper's final victim, and it is assumed that the crimes ended because of the culprit's death, imprisonment, institutionalization, or emigration. I mean, again, that's pinned it down. I mean, they don't know who it is. They don't know why it stopped. But even so, it is definitely one of those, isn't it? He's either died or in prison, carted off to a mental institute, or he's moved on. I mean, I could have told him that. The Whitechapel murderers file details another 4 murders that occurred after Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly. The strangled body of 26-year-old Rose Mylett was found in Clark's Yard High Street, Poplar, on the 20th of December 1888. There was no sign of a struggle, and the police believed that she had either accidentally hanged herself with her collar while in a drunken state or committed suicide. However, faint markings left by a cord on one side of her neck suggested that Rose had been strangled, and the inquest into her death, the jury returned a verdict of murder. Good. Well, it's not good that she was murdered, but it's good that they didn't just go, oh, well, that's a suicide, let's move on, like some of my other cases. Alice Mackenzie was murdered shortly after midnight on the 17th of July 1889 in Castle Alley. She suffered 2 stab wounds to her neck, and her neck artery had been severed. Several minor bruises and cuts were found on her body, which also bore a 7-inch long superficial wound extending beneath her left breast and her navel. One of the examining pathologists, Thomas Bond, who did the earlier ones, believed this to be a Ripper murder, though his colleague, George Bagster Phillips, who had examined the bodies of the 3 previous victims, disagreed. Yes, because they were so bad in comparison. So he's going to heaven forbid George is wrong. Opinions among writers were also divided between those who suspect Alice's murder copied the MO of Jack the Ripper to deflect suspicion, and those who assign this murder to Jack the Ripper. The Pinchin Street torso was a decomposing headless and legless torso of an unidentified woman aged between 30 and 40, discovered beneath a railway arch in Pinchin Street. Wow, I wonder how they came up with that name then. The Pinchin Street torso. Anyway, on 10th of September 1889, bruising about the victim's back, hip and arm indicated that she had been extensively beaten shortly before her death. The victim's abdomen was also extensively mutilated, though her ladyparts had not been wounded. She appeared to have been killed approximately 1 day prior to the discovery. The dismembered sections of the body are believed to have been transported to the railway arch, hidden under an old chemise. At 2:15 a.m. on the 13th of February 1891, so how far are we jumping here? 1889, 1891. Okay, so we're 2 years. PC Ernest Thompson discovered a 25-year-old prostitute named Frances Cole laying beneath a railway arch at Swallow Gardens. Her throat had been deeply cut, but her body was not mutilated, leading some to believe Thompson the police officer, had disturbed her assailant. Frances was still alive, although she died before medical help could arrive. A 53-year-old stoker, James Thomas Sadler, had earlier been seen drinking with Frances, and the two are known to have argued approximately 3 hours before her death. He was arrested by police and charged with her murder. He was briefly thought to be the Ripper, but was later discharged from court for lack of evidence. It says that there are other alleged victims, and one talks about Fairy Faye, but most people agree that she actually didn't exist and that they had been confused between the murder of Emma Elizabeth Smith. So I'm not even going to go there, because they're pretty sure that Fairy Faye didn't exist, and Fairy Faye was a name they gave to an unidentified woman. So also a 38-year-old widow named Annie Millwood was admitted to the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary with numerous stab wounds to her legs and lower torso on the 25th of February 1888, informing staff she had been attacked with a clasp knife by an unknown man. She was later discharged but died from apparently natural causes on the 31st of March. She was 38. How could she die of natural causes? Something wasn't right there in the hospital. Annie Millwood was later speculated to be the Ripper's first victim, although this attack cannot definitively be linked to the perpetrator. Now, it sounds, going by the MO, if you like, that they're stabbed and stuff, I would put Annie Millwood as the first victim, and he learned that, she got away, Another suspected victim was a young dressmaker named Ada Wilson, who reportedly survived being stabbed twice in the neck with a clasp knife upon the doorstep of her home in Bow on the 28th of March. So here we go, we've got February, March, and then... Cindy, calm down. Okay. A further suspected victim, Annie Farmer, resided at the same lodging house as Martha Tabram and reported an attack on the 21st of November 1888. She had received a superficial cut to her throat, although an unknown man with blood on his mouth and hands had run out of this lodging house shouting, "Look at what she's done," before two eyewitnesses heard Annie Farmer scream. Her wound was possibly self-inflicted. The Whitehall Mystery was a term coined for the discovery of a headless torso of a woman on the 2nd of October in 1888 in the basement of the new Metropolitan Police Headquarters being built in Whitehall. An arm and a shoulder belonging to the body were previously discovered floating in the River Thames on the 11th of September, and the left leg was subsequently discovered buried near where the torso was found on the 17th of October. The other limbs and head were never recovered, and the body was never identified. The mutilations were similar to those in the Pinchin Street torso case, where the leg and the head were severed but not the arms. Both the Whitehall mystery and the Pinchin Street case may have been part of a series of murders called the Thames Mysteries, committed by a single serial killer dubbed the Torso Killer. It is debatable whether Jack the Ripper and the Torso Killer were the same person or separate serial killers active in the same area. The MO for the Torso Killer differed from that of the Ripper, and the police at the time discounted any connection between the two. Elizabeth Jackson was a prostitute whose various body parts were collected from the River Thames over a three-week period in June 1889. She may have been another victim of the Torso Killer. These policemen are like, they're not getting paid enough. There is, on the 29th of December 1888, the body of a 7-year-old boy named John Gill was found in a stable block in Bradford. The boy's legs had been severed, his abdomen opened, his intestines drawn out, and his heart and one ear removed. Similarities with the Ripper murders led to press speculation that Jack the Ripper had killed him. The boy's employer, milkman William Barrett, was twice arrested for the murder but released due to insufficient evidence. No one was ever prosecuted. Oh, poor John. He's 7. Carrie Brown was strangled with clothing and then mutilated with a knife on the 24th of April 1891 in New York. Her body was found with a large tear through her groin area and superficial cuts on her legs and back. No organs were removed from the scene, although an ovary was found upon the bed, either purposely removed or unintentionally dislodged. At the time, the murder was compared to those in Whitechapel, though the Metropolitan Police eventually ruled out any connection. I have to say, I am enjoying this, but I kind of want and I know this may sound morbid and weird, but I want a Jack the Ripper board. So I want all the victims, I want how they died or how they were found, and then I'm going to have like Jack the Ripper or the Torso Killer, or a pile that doesn't fit into each, and kind of do the jigsaw puzzle, because I'm seriously beginning to question how many Jack the Ripper did. Did he do more? Were them 3 his kind of MO and the other 2 were just kind of added on? Like, what the heck is going on? It is confusing, and I hope you're kind of sticking with me. But yeah, I kind of want to take over this investigation, and I know it's 1888. I have Amanda to thank for this because she suggested Jack the Ripper, but I had no idea it was so complex, and they have all these people appearing up dead in various states. You know, some are torsos, some are, they've had their throats cut. And in 1888, I'm not quite sure how they actually solved crimes, because you don't have the DNA, you don't have the database, you don't have fingerprints and all of that sort of system going. I'm completely invested in this case now. So, yeah, I'm curious, and we have now the investigation, so we will find out how they kind of get to where they're at. Okay, so, investigation. The vast majority of the City of London police files relating to their investigation into the Whitechapel murders, they were destroyed in the Blitz. The surviving... Well, I'll have to do my own Jack the Ripper board then. The surviving Metropolitan Police files allow a detailed view of investigative procedures in the Victorian era. Yeah, that period. A large team of policemen conducted house-to-house inquiries throughout Whitechapel. Forensic material was collected and examined. Yeah, by a guy who's kind of biased by the sounds. Cindy, sorry. Like I said, invested. Suspects were identified, traced, and either examined more closely or eliminated from the inquiry. Modern police work follows the same pattern. Well, family first, then move outwards. But this is a completely different time. More than 2,000 people were interviewed. Upwards of 300 people were investigated and 80 people were detained. Following the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, the Commissioner of the City Police, Sir James Fraser, offered a reward of £500 for the arrest of the Ripper. Wow, that would have been, it's a lot of money now, but imagine it in 1888. How come that's pounds and the other one was D's? Or was that pennies, maybe? Which would have been a lot of money in them days. But, moving on. The investigation was initially conducted by the Metropolitan Police Whitechapel Division, CID, headed by Detective Inspector Edmund Reed. After the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, Detective Inspectors Frederick Aberline, Henry Moore and Walter Andrews were sent from Central Office at Scotland Yard to assist. The City of London Police were involved under Detective Inspector James McWilliam after the Catherine Eddowes murder, which occurred within the City of London. The overall direction of the murder inquiry was hampered by the fact that the newly appointed head of the CID, Robert Anderson, was on leave in Switzerland. Between the 7th of September and the 6th of October. Wow, now there's a new lead, because in that time, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were all killed, and he was nowhere to be seen. This prompted Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren to appoint Chief Inspector David Swanson to coordinate the inquiry from Scotland Yard. Now, you need to be in Whitechapel, mate. Okay, so butchers, slaughterers, surgeons and doctors were all suspected because of the manner of the mutilations. A surviving note from Major Henry Smith, the acting commissioner of the City Police, indicates that the alibis of local butchers and slaughterers were investigated, with the result that they were eliminated from the inquiry. A report from Inspector Swanson to the Home Office confirms that 76 butchers and slaughterers were visited and that the inquiry encompassed all their employees for the previous 6 months. That's a lot of legwork. Some contemporary figures, including Queen Victoria, thought the pattern of the murders indicated that the culprit was a butcher. Hey! I'm the only one with opinions, thank you. Okay, a butcher or a cattle drover on one of the cattle boats that plied between London and mainland Europe. Whitechapel was close to the London docks, and usually such boats docked on a Thursday or Friday and departed on a Saturday or Sunday. They said, didn't they, at the end of the week, towards the end of the week, or end of the month, I should say. The cattle boats were examined, but the dates of the murders did not coincide with a single boat's movements, and the transfer of a crewman between boats was also ruled out. They are doing their legwork, I have to say. Okay, so in September 1888, a group of volunteer citizens in London's East End formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. They patrolled the streets looking for suspicious characters, partly because of dissatisfaction with the failure of the police to apprehend the perpetrator, and also because some members were concerned that the murders were affecting businesses in the area. I am just taking a swig of tea. I need one. The committee petitioned the government to raise a reward for information leading to the arrest of the killer, offered their own reward of £50 for information leading to his capture, and hired a private detective to question witnesses independently. Everyone is trying to catch this guy. Okay. At the end of October, Robert Anderson, wasn't he the one that was on leave? Henry asked police surgeon Thomas Bond to give his opinion on the extent of the murderer's surgical skills and knowledge. Now, I know he's a police officer, but I do apologise. He's now calm and laid on the sofa. I was going to raise a very good point here. Now, Robert Anderson asked police surgeon Thomas Bond to give his opinion on the extent of the murderer's surgical skill and knowledge. Now, if we go back to Ian Huntley, he asked, how long does DNA evidence last? It's what the perpetrators do. And he was missing when the 3 that they have definitely associated with Jack the Ripper, he was missing. Yeah, in Switzerland. Do we have proof he was in Switzerland? I'm very concerned about Robert Anderson. The opinion offered by Thomas Bond on the character of the Whitechapel murderer is the earliest surviving offender profile. Thomas Bond's assessment was based on his own examination of the most extensively mutilated victim and the post-mortem notes from the 4 previous victims that they associated with Jack the Ripper. He wrote, and I quote, "All 5 murders no doubt were committed by the same hand. Robert Anderson." No, that's not in there. In the first 4, the throats appear to have been cut from left to right. In the last case, owing to the extensive mutilation, it is possible to say in what direction the fatal cut was made, but arterial blood was found on the wall in splashes close to where the woman's head must have been laying. All the circumstances surrounding the murders lead me to form the opinion that the women must have been laying down when murdered, and in every case the throat was first cut." End quote. Thomas Bond was strongly opposed to the idea that the murderer possessed any kind of scientific or anatomy knowledge, or even, quote, "the technical knowledge of a butcher or horse slaughterer," end quote. In his opinion, the killer must have been a man of solitary habits, subject to periodical attacks of homicidal and erotic mania, with the character of the mutilations possibly indicating, I don't even know what that word is, let me just click it, hypersexuality, of course, should have known that. He also stated that, quote, "the homicidal impulse may have developed from a revengeful or brooding condition of the mind, or that the religious mania may have been the original disease, but I do not think the hypothesis is likely," end quote. There is no evidence for the perpetrator engaged in sexual activity with any of the victims, yet psychologists suppose that the penetration of the victims with a knife and leaving them on display in sexually degrading positions with the wounds exposed indicates the perpetrator derived sexual pleasure from the attacks. This view is challenged by others who dismiss that with insupportable supposition. In addition to these contradictions and unreliability of contemporary accounts, attempts to identify the murderer are hampered by the lack of any surviving forensic evidence. DNA analysis on the letters is inconclusive. The available material has been handled many times and is too contaminated to provide meaningful results. There may have been mutually incompatible claims that DNA evidence points conclusively to 2 different suspects, and the methodology of both has also been criticised. This is what I'm saying, guys. There's so much in this that is inconsistent, and yeah, they kind of thought, oh well, yeah, okay, she's got a slash wound, we'll add that to the Ripper's list. But I am serious. I need a board, because I'm telling you, Robert Anderson is looking well iffy right now, and he's around it all the time, so he knows how to clear up. I've got you thinking now, but I hope I have. Okay, suspects. The concentration of the killings around weekends. Did he work weekends and public holidays, and within a short distance of each other, has indicated that many of the within a short distance of each other has indicated to many that the Ripper was in regular employment and lived locally. I'm telling you, I've called this. Wow, I said about new leads. They're so busy focusing on slaughterers and butchers and doctors and anyone with knowledge, and now Thomas Bond has ruled that out, and he can lead the investigation. He's head of the... I'm telling you, I'm calling out. Others have thought that the killer was an educated upper-class man, possibly a doctor or an aristocrat who ventured into Whitechapel from a more well-to-do area. We need to look up Robert Anderson. Such theories draw on cultural perceptions such as fear of the medical profession, mistrust of modern science, or the exploitation of the poor by the rich. Suspects proposed years after the murders include virtually anyone remotely connected to the case by contemporary documents, as well as many famous names who were never considered in the police investigation, including a member of the British royal family, an artist, and a doctor, but not the police officer. Everyone alive at the time is now long dead, and modern authors are free to accuse anyone without any need for supporting historical evidence. That's very true. I am kind of doing that, but he was apparently, and I finger quote, in Switzerland, and yeah. Suspects named in the contemporary police documents include 3 in Sir Melville's 1894 memorandum, but the evidence against these individuals is at best circumstantial. Yeah, okay, I'm put back in my place. Mine is is it circumstantial? There are many varied theories about the identity and the profession of Jack the Ripper, but authorities are not agreed upon any of them, and the number of the named suspects reaches over 100. Well, I've whittled it down to 1, and I don't have any proof or evidence. Despite continued interest in the case, the Ripper's identity remains unknown. The term Ripperology was coined to describe the study and analysis of the Ripper cases, and the murders have inspired numerous works of fiction. Speaking of which, as I was recording this, I had a notification pop up on my phone, and for those of you who are this far in and this far invested with me, there is a Netflix series called The Ripper coming on the 16th of December, I believe. So I'm going to be watching that, and then I'm going to write to them and say, look, you didn't consider Robert Anderson. Was he in Switzerland? Okay. Letters. Over the course of the Whitechapel murders, the police, newspapers and other individuals received hundreds of letters regarding the case. Some letters were well-intentioned offers of advice as to how to catch the killer, but the vast majority were either hoaxes or generally useless. Hundreds of letters claim to have been written by the killer himself. Hundreds! Wow. And 3 of these in particular are prominent. The Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter. The Dear Boss letter was dated the 25th of September and postmarked 27th of September 1888, was received that day by the Central News Agency and was forwarded to Scotland Yard on the 29th of September. It was considered a hoax, but when Catherine Eddowes was found 3 days later after the letter's postmark with a section of one ear cut from her body, the promise of the author to, quote, clip the lady's ear off, end quote, gained attention. Catherine's ear appears to have been nicked by the killer incidentally during his attack, and the letter writer's threat to send the ears to the police was never carried out. The name Jack the Ripper was first used in this letter by the signatory and gained worldwide notoriety after its publication. Most of the letters that followed copied this letter's tone. Some sources claim that another letter dated the 17th of September 1888 was the first one to use the name Jack the Ripper. But most experts believe that this was a fake inserted into police records. Well, who was in a position to do that? Oh, Robert Anderson. I'm sorry. The Saucy Jackie postcard was postmarked the 1st of October 1888 and was received the same day by the Central News Agency. The handwriting was similar to the Dear Boss letter and mentioned the murders committed on the 30th of September, which the author refers to by writing quote marks, I quote, double event this time, end quote. It has been argued that the postcard was posted before the murders were publicised, making it unlikely that a crank would hold such knowledge of the crime. However, it was postmarked more than 24 hours after the killings occurred, long after details of the murders were known and publicised by journalists and had become general community gossip by the residents of Whitechapel. The From Hell letter was received by George Lusk, leader of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Wow. On the 16th of October 1888. The handwriting and style is unlike that of the Dear Boss and Saucy Jackie postcard. The letter came with a small box in which Lusk discovered half a human kidney, preserved in, quote, spirits of wine, which is ethanol. Catherine Eddowes' left kidney had been removed by the killer. The writer claimed that he, quote, fried and ate the missing half. There is disagreement over the kidney. Some contend it belonged to Catherine Eddowes, while others argued it was a practical joke. The kidney was examined by Dr. Thomas Openshaw of the London Hospital, who determined that it was human and it was from the left side. but contrary to false newspaper reports, he could not determine any other biological characteristics. He subsequently also reviewed a letter signed Jack the Ripper. Scotland Yard published, I think that means faxes, I don't know, of the Dear Boss letter and the postcard on the 3rd of October in the ultimate vain hope that a member of the public would recognise the handwriting. Ring, 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 do you want to have a look at your boss's handwriting? Charles Warren explained in a letter to Godfrey Lushton, he was a permanent Under-Secretary of State for the Home Department at that time, quote, I think the whole thing a hoax, but of course we are bound to try and ascertain the writer in any case, end quote. On the 7th of October in 1888, George R. Sims in the Sunday newspaper, Referee, implied scathing that the letter was written by a journalist to hurl the circulation of a newspaper sky high. Police officials later claimed to have identified a specific journalist as the author of both the Dear Boss letter and the postcard. The journalist was identified as Tom Bullen in a letter from Chief Inspector John Littlechild to George R. Sims dated the 23rd of September 1913, so a long time later. A journalist named Fred Best reportedly confessed in 1931 that he and a colleague at the Star had written the letters signed Jack the Ripper to heighten interest in the murders and keep the business alive. Media. The Jack the Ripper murders mark an important watershed in the treatment of crime by journalists. Jack the Ripper was not the first serial killer, but his case was the first to create a worldwide media frenzy. The Elementary Education Act 1880, which had extended upon a previous act, made school attendance compulsory regardless of class. Yay! Good for them. As such, by 1888, more working class people in England and Wales were literate. Yeah, that's a good move. Tax reforms in the 1850s had enabled the publication of inexpensive newspapers with a wider circulation. These mushroomed in the later Victorian era to include mass circulation newspapers costing as little as halfpenny. Along with popular magazines such as the Illustrated Police News, which made the Ripper the beneficiary of previously unparalleled publicity. Consequently, at the height of the investigation, over 1 million copies of newspapers with extensive coverage devoted to the Whitechapel murders were sold each day. However, many of the articles were sensationalized and speculative, and false information was regularly printed as fact. But that's good because, well, it's not good, but if they got a letter saying, well, that's not true, I didn't do that, they would find someone. But there you go. In addition, several articles speculating as to the identity of the Ripper alluded to local rumours that the perpetrator was either Jewish or foreign. In early September, 6 days before the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, the Manchester Guardian reported, quote, "Whatever information may be in the possession of the police, they deem it necessary to keep it secret." That's how it works, but okay. It is believed their attention is particularly directed to a notorious character known as Leather Apron, end quote. Journalists were frustrated by the unwillingness of the CID to reveal details of their investigation to the public, and so resorted to writing reports of questionable authenticity. Imaginative descriptions of Leather Apron appeared in the press, but rival journalists dismissed these as mythical, outgrown of the reporter's fantasy. John Pisa, a local Jew who made footwear from leather, was also known by the name Leather Apron because he wears a leather apron when he's doing his. He was arrested, even though the investigating inspector reported that, quote, "At present there is no evidence whatsoever against him." He was soon released after the confirmation of his alibis. Well, that was all the Manchester Guardian's fault. Oh my goodness, that's shocking. After the publication of the Dear Boss letter, Jack the Ripper and Leather Apron as the name adopted by the press and public to describe the killer. The name Jack was already used to describe another fabled London attacker, Spring-Heeled Jack, who supposedly leapt over walls to strike at his victims. We'll have to look him up. And escape as quickly as he came. The invention and adoption of a nickname for a particular killer became standard media practice, with examples such as the Axeman of New Orleans, the Boston Strangler, and the Beltway Sniper. Examples derived from Jack the Ripper include the French Ripper, the Dusseldorf Ripper, the Camden Ripper, the Blackout Ripper, Jack the Stripper, Yorkshire Ripper, and the Rostov Ripper. Sensational press reports, combined with the fact that no one was ever convicted of the murders, have confused analysis and created a legend that casts a shadow over later serial killers. And that's very, very true. I mean, we're talking about 1888. This random guy who they don't know who he is, so they name him Jack the Ripper. And here we are in 2020 discussing what he done. I mean, we could now change that to Robert Anderson. That's just my opinion. Just my opinion. There is so much out there on Jack the Ripper, and this last section is the legacy. The nature of the Ripper's murders and the impoverished lifestyle of the victims drew attention to the poor living conditions of the East End, public opinion against the overcrowded, insanitary slums. In the 2 decades after the murders, the worst of the slums were cleared and demolished, but the streets and some buildings survived, and the legend of the Ripper is still promoted by various guided tours of the murder sites and other locations pertaining to the case. For many years, the 10 Bells Public House in Commercial Street, which had been frequented by at least one of the Ripper victims, was the focus of such tours. I'll talk about that in a second. In the immediate aftermath of the murders and later, Jack the Ripper became the children's bogeyman. Depictions were often monstrous, and in the 1920s and 1930s, he was depicted in films dressed in everyday clothes as a man with a hidden secret, preying on unsuspecting victims. The atmosphere and evil were suggested through lighting effects and shadow play. By the 1960s, the Ripper had become the symbol of predatory aristocrats. Oh, I can't say that word. Aristocrats. And it was more often portrayed in a top hat and dressed as a gentleman. The establishment as a whole became the villain, with the Ripper acting as a manifestation of the upper class exploitation. The image of the Ripper merged with or borrowed symbols from horror stories such as Dracula's cloak or Frankenstein's organ harvest. The fictional world of the Ripper confused with multiple genres ranging from Sherlock Holmes to Japanese erotic horror. Okay then. Jack the Ripper features in hundreds of works of fiction and works which straddle the boundaries between fact and fiction. And this is the thing, there's nothing... I kind of made my feelings clear along the way, including the Ripper letters and a hoax diary, the Diary of Jack the Ripper. The Ripper appears in novels, short stories, poems, comic books, games, songs, plays, operas, television programs, and films. More than 100 non-fictional works deal exclusively with Jack the Ripper murders, making it one of the most written about true crime subjects. And here is a girl on YouTube deciding to jump on the bandwagon. So in 2015, the Jack the Ripper Museum opened in East London to minor protests. There is no waxwork figure of Jack the Ripper at Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors, unlike numerous murderers of lesser fame, in accordance with their policy of not modelling persons whose likeness is unknown. He is instead depicted as a shadow. In 2006, BBC History magazine and its readers selected Jack the Ripper as the worst Briton in history. And there you go. And like I said a little while ago, I did have a notification pop up on my phone. On the 16th of December, there will be another The Ripper, it's called. So I will be checking that out for sure. This has been very interesting. I have enjoyed spending the afternoon learning about Jack the Ripper, and there's so much if, buts and maybes, and I don't need a board anymore. I have convinced myself that Robert Anderson is Jack the Ripper, and Jack the Ripper is guilty of the 3 horrific murders that they want to pin together, which I am in dispute over. Like I said, you had the torso killer, Jack the Ripper, and then someone else on a little spree of their own, and they're kind of like, I know, dodging each other in the dark. So I hope you have enjoyed this story. I know it got very confusing with all the names, but I hope that, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed. I shouldn't really say that, but you know what I mean. We're fanatics after all. Please, if you have a theory of your own, please let me know in the comments. If you've gone, oh my goodness, I think she's actually cracked it, let me know in the comments, because I'm very curious. There's so many theories out there. We're never going to find out who Jack the Ripper is. My son is now home from school, so he's going to jump on and give you his version of Jack the Ripper. Thank you, guys.
Hello, fanatics. Today I am on the channel to talk about Jack the Ripper and what I know about him. I know Jack the Ripper was brutal and he murdered 5 women. He was out on his 4th kill. He nearly got caught, but he escaped and he'd killed his 5th victim by then. And every time he would kill a woman of a specific type, apparently, I do not know which type, then he would cut and rip their intestines out and put it next to the body so they could easily identify who it was who murdered them. And that's nearly everything I know about Jack the Ripper. I do not know much.
That's very accurate.
Accurate, but not much.
He did. He took out body parts and put them around.
I think he only took out intestines.
Yeah. So what lesson are you doing Jack the Ripper in?
We're not really learning about him in a lesson. We just heard about him because we were doing Sherlock Holmes.
Oh. So what's Sherlock Holmes got to do with Jack the Ripper?
Nothing. It was just showing us how to solve a mystery and what Jack the Ripper is.
Oh, okay. So they chose Jack the Ripper.
Mhm.
Wow. He didn't do a very good job then, did he?
Why?
Because he never got caught. Do you know, I think I solved it.
No, that means Jack the Ripper did really well if he didn't get caught.
That's not a good thing when you're murdering people, Reese.
People know who he is, but you don't want them to know your identity so they can just stroll up
but
to every house.
But the police have to arrest him so that he can't kill any more people. Because it's reported that he may have killed more than 5, or he's known to do 3 where he pulled out the intestines. 1 he might have got interrupted so he didn't quite get there, and another one they just kind of tagged on, in my personal opinion.
You don't think so, because it was just tons of slashes in their face. However, it would make sense.
But he didn't slash the face of the other 3.
But it says that he was running from the police, so he didn't have very much time, so he couldn't try and make the precise cut. So I would say that means he couldn't cut it quickly, so he just slashed as many times as he could.
On 3 people?
No, the police were chasing him on the 5th victim, so he didn't have very much time to make a perfect wound so he could rip out the intestines. So he's just slashed them as many times as he could on the face while running past.
Well, I think I'm Sherlock Holmes. I think I solved the case of who Jack the Ripper is.
Is he a doctor?
No.
Because that's someone they think he is.
Yes.
Because of how easily that he could find where the intestines are.
That's true, but no, he wasn't a doctor.
Some people think he's in the graveyard.
He definitely is now, yes. And I can't prove it. Obviously, it was 1888, and all the evidence that they had got blown up in the Blitz.
World War I or World War II?
The Blitz.
Oh, Blitz.
The Blitz
Was when...
another war, but...
Was that when everyone just kept getting bombed in that area?
Yes, especially London, because it's the capital of England. So it's always going to be the place that people aim to bomb. So, would you like to hear my theory?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this person, I have to be very careful in how much I share with you. However, I'm over here. Why are we now fiddling? My theory is using the art of deduction. Is I read the whole story today, and they were saying that he could have done more murders. Now, serial killers tend to start off slowly doing little things, and then they escalate into bigger things, don't they? Now, the forensic person turned around and said that this person doesn't necessarily need knowledge or a surgical background. So it doesn't have to be a doctor, it doesn't have to be a butcher. And then later on, there were letters written to... Don't bite your nails, babe. Because picking your nose is so much better.
I want to chew. I know we're recording. Have an itch. We're not allowed to have an itch.
Listen then. There were letters written to the police saying, I'm Jack the Ripper and I did this and I did that. Yeah? And in the article it said that they think that it was snuck in with all the other letters because they got hundreds and hundreds of letters. And there's one person who was missing at the time of the 3 murders. There was one person who could have snuck that note in the stash that was at the police station. Any idea who that may be?
Me?
Henry.
Barking at the idea of me being Jack the Ripper.
So, I think it was a police officer called Robert Anderson because he was missing for a month when the 3 murders took place.
I don't know if he was murdered.
He wasn't murdered. He was the head of the CID or something. I think he did it. I have no proof.
It would be illogical.
Okay, why would
Because if he was in the police force,
Yes.
when he nearly got caught, he probably would have been wearing the same uniform, so they would have noticed that they're in the police force.
Do you sleep in your school uniform?
No,
Do you wear your school uniform at weekends?
sometimes.
No, you don't.
I do.
Ever. You
I like
don't. He has other clothes. And he could
Yes.
easily disguise his face. He was known to wear a deer hat, which is like a hat that covers your ears, you know, them side bits down there, like Sherlock Holmes. So they might not have recognised him in the dark because he only ever killed at night. And at weekends. Was he working that weekend? I need to see the records. But guess what? There isn't any.
But running through it,
Yep.
they would have chased him, and wouldn't the aspects of the chase look like he had been trained in the same way?
Do me and you run the same way?
But the police force was made when this happened, so they wasn't very good. So it would be illogical for him to be a police officer because he would have only just then had to be able to jump over stuff and escape.
Do you know what homicide is?
Is it an accidental murder?
No, homicide is murder. and the forensic person said that they have homicidal tendencies. That's just my theory. I'm not saying I'm right.
Well, guess what?
What?
You're wrong.
We'll see what the comments say. And there you go, guys. Thank you for watching. Please remember to leave your comments down below, and if you've enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button. Bye.